Hello there. What a palaver. Sorry about that. Running a little bit late. I tried to start on time, and but lots going on. Not the least of which is big news. Of course, most of you probably know it already. But Christian Horner leaving Red Bull after all these years. I'm not doffing my hat, actually, although it's possibly symbolic. Yeah, big news. Only happened a few minutes ago, but he's being temporarily replaced by Laurent Mekies, who's done such a good job as team principal at Racing Bulls, and Christian out is what I hear. That's not the reason I'm actually delayed and late. The reason I'm delayed, it's a long story, but if ever you have to do a factory reboot on your computer, which I had to because I had some audio issues, and it solved it doing the reboot. But I just assumed, obviously a massive mistake, that everything would be the same with all my setup. And of course, I've had to redo everything, all the links, the codes, the million things going on. And as a result of all that, sadly today, I won't be able to give you the pop-up chat. It won't be popping up on the screen as normal. But I will be, of course, reading all your comments and going through them, as many as I can. But that's the only real difference, hopefully now that we're up and running. And but anyway, yeah, what news? Christian Horner. Not altogether surprising. If you think about the last 24 months, or say 12 months, shall we say. I mean, he failed to keep Adrian Newey, which is almost as bad as not signing him if you're Ferrari. That's one thing. And then, there's a lot of background stuff, which hasn't been good. And obviously the performance of the car isn't great. And all the seesawing with the number 2 driver and where they're going, and a few other issues with, for me, on-track stuff. You know, what happened in the Spanish Grand Prix was just ridiculous. And quite a lot of other stuff too, which we could go into. Anyway, so obviously I would imagine it's a shock for Christian, because I don't think it's happening on his terms, and to happen this way very suddenly is a very, very big thing. But we wish him well, because ultimately his contribution has been amazing. It's not to say he won't be continuing the sport in some other role, who knows, but his contribution to the sport has been amazing. I remember all those years ago when he got the job, offered the job, and he took Matt Bishop and I out to lunch, and me actually, out to lunch, just to see what we thought about it and how it would go. He was quite a sort of, humble and lovely person, and obviously we tried to give him a bit of advice in inverted commas, and over the years, of course, it's all gelled incredibly well. And the big turning point for Christian was always to get Adrian Newey, which he did, and which Bobby Rahal almost did, in fairness to Bobby, when he was at Jaguar, and then Jaguar morphed into Red Bull, of course, and Christian sort of made that deal happen. And from that moment onwards, it was just like, wow, it was a rocket ship, wasn't it? So yeah, good job too by Laurent Mekies, ex-Ferrari, done a very good job at Racing Bulls. I have to say, I don't think he's getting the best, or has got the best, from Liam Lawson, for that matter, or Taku Sato, as we now know. I don't think that they've progressed in the direction in which they could have, and both of them should have done a better job in the A team. To some extent, responsibility for that is Mekies, because he hasn't been going into enough detail about the way they drive. But that's just me really thinking that way, I suppose. But I think overall he's done an outstanding job, hasn't he? The way he's got the engineering department there to gel. And it's not only him, of course, but if I think of people like Jonathan Eddles, for example, very, very good people in that team. Know Jonathan from way back from the Williams days, of course. So, yeah, big news. I'm sure you guys will probably want to add your comments and thoughts to that. But let me start going through comments. We've got so much going on. Obviously, the penalty thing is going to be a big deal, I would imagine, and I don't know whether I should express my thoughts on that. If we don't get questions about it, I will. But let's just start from the get-go. From Lee Kambanga. Hi, Peter. Don't you think Red Bull, well, there you go, straight on to them, was a bit overzealous to change the philosophy of the RB19 to the 20? I know you said they had reached the ceiling, but the downfall is crazy with the same regulations, is the comment from Lee. Well, it's quite an opposite comment, isn't it? Bearing in mind the news that we've just been talking about, that Christian Horner is leaving the Red Bull team. And yeah, 19 to 20, that was in the days of Adrian Newey still. So you wouldn't say to Adrian, "Oh no, that was a mistake, Adrian. You shouldn't go develop this car." You take it. I think obviously it's pretty clear that since Adrian's departure, give or take the odd brilliant lap from Max Verstappen, the car has lacked development, and it's probably no worse than it ever was. It's just that everybody else's level, well, not everybody else, but certainly McLaren, Ferrari on occasions, Mercedes more often than Ferrari, are quicker than Red Bull, and they kind of reached their ceiling, which was sealed by the departure of Adrian Newey. And I've said a couple of times, I wonder whether he chuckles to himself going to bed at night saying, "Oh, if only they ran those updates that I knew I could have given them but didn't." I think it is as simple as that to some extent. It's all about human beings and people, and using good people well and good facilities well. And yes, they've got great facilities at Red Bull. Yes, they've got good people, but when somebody like Adrian leaves, it is a big deal. The rudder of the ship has come off, and so you need to get a new rudder. And it's working reasonably well. They're there or thereabouts periodically, but it does take the genius of a Max Verstappen to really get the best from the car. And then we saw how bad that car was in the race relative to how half reasonable it was in qualifying. But I don't blame Red Bull for going on with the 20. I mean, that was just part of logical development around regulation changes as well, of course. AB from India. I'm just reading these. I'm clicking on it in my old habit. There's no point clicking anymore, is it? Because I've just got to read them out. AB from India. This will be a good question about future of the Indian Grand Prix or something like that. How do you rate Steve Smith as a batsman? Straight into cricket. Oh, well, I won't say waste. We won't spend too much time on this, AB, because there's a lot of things to discuss. But how do you compare him with Aussies like Ponting and War, Steve Smith? Has been doing Australia and Tests unmatched. And yeah, I think Steve Smith's excellent. When you consider he basically started life as a spinner and then he evolved into a batsman, and he can probably spin the odd ball or two. So yeah, I mean, he's definitely one of the great Aussies, isn't he, of all time? He's up there with Steve Ward, Don Bradman, as you say, Ricky Ponting, and probably Oscar Piastri, who's a bit of a cricket fan, isn't he? AB again, Peter. Okay, and there's a proper question from Peter from AB. I feel, given how treacherous conditions were, Max had no business being so close to Oscar and even overtaking him. Max made it look worse and milked it to get Oscar a penalty. I'm sure Oscar noticed this. Okay, right. Well, let's start on all that. My view is, and I've expressed this a few times, that the biggest problem we have here are these ludicrous rules with penalties. Let me rephrase that. Ludicrously loosely worded rules with ludicrously pin-sharp penalties. There's a complete imbalance between the rule that is there to be broken or not broken and the penalty, which can be applied in a very precise way for a number of things, therefore, because it is such a grey area. I mean, if you take the whole safety car situation, the rules governing how you drive behind the safety car when the safety car lights are on and off do not take into account, for example, how long the safety car is out and how cold the brakes may or may not have got, the ambient temperature relative to the compound of tyre that most people are running, whether it's wet or whether it's dry. There's just to name but 3 variables that are not taken account of by the rules. And they use loose phrases like erratic. You're not allowed to drive erratically. Well, what does that mean? That's a relative term. Everybody is erratic in the sense that they're doing this all the time and braking hard to try to get brake temperature, and this puts a bit of temperature into the and the braking hard puts temperature into the tires as well. But of course, if you brake very hard in the wet, it's different from braking very hard in the dry. That's the first thing. And so a lot of people are out there on the Ethernet talking about the difference in brake pedal pressure between George Russell's move in the Canadian Grand Prix when he braked suddenly and Max went to the right to supposedly avoid him, which was 30 psi, and what Oscar Piastri was doing at Silverstone, which was 59, virtually 60 psi, almost double the brake pedal pressure of George Russell. Now, you could say, well, that is terrible, but it's got to be seen in context. And you just don't know how, I mean, you've got to see in the context, obviously, of the brake temperatures for a start and how much pedal pressure it probably needed to get the brakes up. That's no excuse. It's just an explanation of why everybody probably at Silverstone had to brake harder to get more temperature into the brakes. And there's a concertina effect, of course. And if the leader of the race is braking that hard, it goes right down through the field. So, and then there's this word dangerous. You know, that's a relative term as well. Then there's the whole business of whether the safety car lights are on or off. And then there's the differentiation, in my opinion, between the driver at the front of the race and the driver at the back of the race. Now, there is a degree of tolerance with the 10-car rule applied in this, but all of it is wishy-washy, and all of it is a degree of tolerance based on the thoughts of the stewards at the time and the race director at the time, and all that is so loose that I think you have to come to the conclusion that the whole penalty system for that needs to be completely revised, and to issue a penalty in the middle of a race with a stop-go, which has to be applied during the pit stop, is impossible, really, because there's always going to be an argument on the other side. I mean, for example, in Canada, Max Verstappen said he had to move to the right to avoid George Russell's sudden braking. George Russell's, and that he could see George looking in his mirrors to try to make sure Max was as near as possible to cause the issue. George says he was looking in his mirrors to make sure that Max wasn't behind him, so that he was going to do a hard brake and he wasn't going to interfere with Max. Now, you and I don't know which of those is true. We can have our guess, we can have our thoughts about that. But that's the sort of stuff you have to talk about with the stewards after the race. You can't make a decision based on that. How do they know these things? And I've had quite a lot of response, particularly Australians, I've got to say, who think this is a total stitch-up, and that to have a British driver leading the British Grand Prix was the goal of all this. I think we have to stay a little bit away from that, because only because if we accept that, then we might as well say, well, we don't want the FIA, we don't want Formula One as it is anymore. And some people are saying that, I've had enough of Formula One. If this is what it is, forget it. So I'm not going around in circles. I'm just saying, for me, and I think I totally get it with those people. And I think if you came in, you don't want to know about pedal pressure. You just want to know about who's leading the race. The safety car's gone in. Let's start the Grand Prix. You don't want all that stuff. You don't want a penalty for drivers that are going around at 50 kilometers an hour. And my overall response, therefore, is the whole business of this is the crime, that is the penalty, needs to be revised. If they're going to give these severe penalties, then they have to be much more specific about the crime. And I'm afraid it applies also to many other things. This also applies to Oliver Behrman and his shunt and the penalty he got, which was pretty draconian as well, in the context of what Kimi Antonelli did at the previous race, also with cold brakes. Different thing. It was in a race. It was worse, much worse. And took out Max Verstappen, could have taken out more cars, and got a 3-place grid penalty at the following race, whereas Oliver got a 10-place grid penalty, just because it was the pit lane. I mean, there's absolutely no logic in that. And if they're so paranoid when the track is red about keeping speeds down, then they need to have a virtual safety car situation as soon as the track goes red. It just needs to be obligatory. Why don't they do that? So there's no discussion about how quickly you can go or not go. So I was never a fan of all these sporting rule regulations coming in the first place. And I'm certainly, therefore, not a fan of all the ridiculous penalties that are applied in this way. And just making them visible, as the FIA have now done recently, is no excuse. It's just like saying, oh, well, we know it's not very good, but now everybody knows about it. Don't blame us. That's not correct either. So to me, it all needs to be looked at. Okay. What are we? Marina Nora Rodriguez Huiz. Hello there. Hi, Peter. Hope you're doing well. Yep, very well, thanks. Since last Sunday, I've read so many times that Charles is no good in wet conditions, and having been a fan of yours for a few years now, I don't believe you agree. ... No, I don't agree with that. Is he not good in the wet? I mean, he totally messed his race up by going in for slicks, didn't he, on the formation lap? Now, I think of all the drivers who went for slicks and found that it was too wet, I think he's the guy that should have done the best job. And he didn't really. But then he didn't do a brilliant job. He hasn't done a brilliant job for a couple of races now in terms of mistakes and things that are going on. And he does appear to be driving a little bit more harshly than he used to, I think. Canada, he was really good. Well, I say really good. He was really good in the closing stages. But he had that thing in qualifying, didn't he? I think what we're seeing at I think Charles is very good in the wet, so I think that's nonsense. But I think what we're seeing with Charles at the moment is a recurrence of what we've always said, that he's got a lot of emotional baggage inside him, and that comes from a number of sources. It comes from his upbringing. It comes from the big events that have occurred in his life, sad events, and it comes from being a Ferrari driver for so long and being a part of that whole, what do you want to call it? I wouldn't say cesspit because that's not the right word. It's just a vortex of politics and exposure and minute examination of everything you do. And he's been a part of that for most of his career. So that would have much more of an effect on him, basic emotional guy that he is anyway, than it would on a Max or a Nigel Mansell who can just shrug all that stuff off. And so I think that's what we're seeing. I think there's been a build-up of a lot of stuff. And then there's, the Lewis thing. And the car just not being very good, I guess, is one of it as well. He should be out there being Jackie Stewart, driving an H16 BRM on the limit in 1967 and, being right there quicker than Graham Hill, shouldn't he? That's what he should be. But he's not looking as good as Jackie did in 67 for the reasons I've just said. And that's always been Charles' shortcoming. And that may show up in the wet, cold tyres, has a moment, tries to pass this person, goes off. That's not wet weather. That's not, is he good in the wet? That's just a function of being in the wet when things are not good and going for a gap that isn't there. But I still believe that if Charles was in a very good car and it was pouring with rain and he was at the front and he didn't have any dramas, he'd be as good in the wet as anybody else. Better, probably. I think he's probably a brilliant wet weather driver. We just never really get to see it very often. Marina Noriga again says, by the way, my daughter and I celebrated my birthday back in May. What's going on? It's covered it up now. Here we go. Back in May with a visit to the Formula One exhibition in Buenos Aires. Absolutely amazing. Congratulations to you and everyone involved. Thank you very much. I'm glad you saw it and glad you enjoyed it much more. And I'm going to be doing soon, very soon, it needs to be almost next week, I think, and I'm away. I'm going to be sort of trying to relive as much as I can that amazing week in July in 1980 when Carlos Reutemann finished third in the British Grand Prix and then third in the Côte d'Azur Rally in the same week. So he's on the podium for Formula One and the World Rally Championship in the same week. Amazing. Carlos Reutemann. In the Williams, of course, at Brands, and then in the factory Fiat 131 Arbath, teammate to Walter Roll and Attilio Bettiger. And Roll won it, Carlos was third, beaten, and P2 was Hanno Mikkola in a Mercedes. It was a very quick car in those days in rallying. And he beat a lot of really good people. So yeah, it was an amazing event for Carlos Reutemann. So I'm going to try and do that. Having said all of that, I'm about to go on a road trip, which is going to take forever, I think. We're driving from Spain to Estonia. So it's going to take 4 or 5 days to get there. But I'm in no rush. I'm going to stop at nice things on the way, a few old circuits and Porsche Museum and Solitude and maybe the Nürburgring. Just take our time, get up there and watch the rally in Estonia, 4 days, and then drive back. So I'll be back just in time to do the Belgian Grand Prix. Won't be stopping at Spa because I need to get back home after that long trip. So in the middle of all that, I'll be trying to do something about Carlos somehow. I hope. So if not, I'll do it when I get back. Sarosh Soman says, hi Peter. Lewis Hamilton said that Leclerc's setup is extreme for oversteer and that he gets his rear tyres to grain when he tried that setup, which Leclerc is not getting. In my opinion, that shows the talent that is Leclerc. Yeah, well, what Lewis is basically saying there, if I can translate it, is that all Charles wants is a front end, and he doesn't really care what he does to the rear in order to get that front end to turn in, and he can live with it. Whereas Lewis is, when he runs that setup, he finds the car quite pointy and he's constantly trying to save the rear, and in doing so he's graining the rears. So, but I don't know how recent that comment was from Lewis, because to me there was a little bit of a turning point for Lewis at Silverstone. He did seem to be turning in a little bit earlier into the slow corners, and he looked to be enjoying the front of the car more than he has, or using the front of the car, let's say, more than he has at any time so far this year, and indeed last year as well at Merck. So I think we might see some changes. I'm not sure they'll be evident at Spa, but it might be all the quick corners there could be a Charles Leclerc fest. But Hungary, I think Lewis could be looking pretty good. Sarosh also says, I feel that someone should tell Leclerc that if things aren't going his way, he just needs to settle into a rhythm and drive without expectations. He will naturally get results. He's super talented. Yeah, well, but are there people out there to whom he listens? I don't know. Nicholas Todd, I think, is still his manager, and I'm not sure Nicholas would say something like that. It's probably more a commercial relationship, I would imagine, and it's probably left to Charles, and I don't imagine they're saying that in the Ferrari garage to him. But I think you're right. What you're basically saying is just don't be so emotional. Calm down, Charles, and rely on your talent. And that's that comes back to the emotional thing. Oscar Lindgren says, hi Peter, do you think many overlook Hamilton's raw speed in his McLaren years, specifically his driving style and how he secured multiple wins every season, even in tough years like 09 and 11? Do they? If they're saying, Lewis is over the hill and this just shows he was never any good, then of course people are forgetting how good he is and can still be, in my opinion. And you're right, he was unbelievable. And I think the person who overlooked his speed the most at McLaren was Fernando Alonso, to be honest. And I think, it was a classic example of Fernando not believing that Lewis would be that quick out of the box as a rookie. And when he was quicker than Fernando in a couple of areas, only a couple, then Fernando didn't know how to react to that because he'd never had that at any stage in his career. So his only response, a bit like Vettel at Ferrari, was to say, the car's not right, it needs to be set up for me, it's set up for Lewis. The only thing really they did was change the brakes to Hitco brakes that Fernando liked, and it was good for him and it worked for him. But it didn't really slow Lewis down because he was still on the carbon industries and going well. So, I think at McLaren he was unbelievably good, wasn't he? Well, before that, if you looked at him at any stage of his career, whether it be Formula 3, GP3, Formula 2, he was phenomenal. And right up until beginning of 2022, he remained phenomenal. Obviously ups and downs, particularly in the Nico year, but generally phenomenal and still quite capable of delivering. He didn't look far away from the old Lewis at Silverstone, I thought. Not bad at all. Not brilliant in the early phase of the race, but, starting to dance with the music again, which was good. AB, press this thing again, reflex action. For Leclerc, a lot of Leclerc questions, interesting, isn't it? For Leclerc to be champion, or even being considered as one of the all-time greats, he needs to leave Ferrari and join a cutthroat team like Red Bull, where no matter what, will get the job done. He's too comfortable at Ferrari. Well, maybe. I think he's a bit too confused at Ferrari more than comfortable. But I agree with you. I'd love to see him in a Red Bull. Love to see him in a Merc, in one of those more disciplined British teams. McLaren even, if there was ever room. I think he'd be fabulous there. I can't imagine if he was available that any one of those teams that I mentioned wouldn't look at it. Obviously McLaren have got their two guys. Red Bull, definitely you'd be talking to Leclerc, and so would Mercedes. So I'd love to see that. I'd love to see it. I'd love to see him at Red Bull, actually. I'd love to see the new Red Bull, Lauren Meckies. Those who are just joining us, Christian Horner is leaving Red Bull, replaced temporarily, possibly permanently, by Lauren Meckies from Racing Bulls. And I'd love to see Charles Leclerc in that car if Max goes to, say, Aston Martin or, I don't know, down the road, Mercedes. So AB says, Horner saying he would sign Oscar if Max leaves says a lot what the grid thinks of Oscars versus Leclerc. Leclerc being the talent he needs is a new team, Aston with Adrian and Red Bull, and stop being a good boy at Ferrari. Well, that's going on. You're saying that it's quite interesting that Christian Horner, who is now no longer at Red Bull, as it happens, would sign Oscar Piastri instead of Charles Leclerc. Would he? I don't know. He's probably thinking... I don't know what he's thinking. He's probably thinking there's more likelihood Oscar would leave because of the whole Lando Oscar thing. Is there room for both of them in the future? You know, rubbing shoulders the way they do, and there's more chance of getting him. Whereas Leclerc is always going to be at Ferrari if he wants to be there, I guess. We've got a super chat. Thank you very much for that. Just have a look. That's M.A. Khan. Thank you, M.A. Khan. Mark Hughes in his series on driving style says Max's style is not new. It's the same as Schumacher, Mansell, Prost, Stewart, Clark and Moss. He didn't mention Fangio. Do we know what his style was? Well, he's absolutely right about all of that. And I would include Carlos Reutemann there as well. I'm surprised he didn't, but anyway. And there were plenty of others that none of us, Mark, nor I, nor others, would have seen enough to judge. Fangio, yeah, I would say Fangio. From what I've seen, I mean, obviously graceful, beautiful, graceful power slides. You know, Maserati 250F, 957 are the sort of famous pictures. You don't see the same sort of graceful power slides in the 54, 55 Mercs, but that was a different car and less able to do that. But talking to Sterling about Fangio, he was, and I was talking to him once about this whole business of getting in early, and that's where it all happens. That first phase of the corner, he said Fangio was exactly the same. So I can only quote Sterling on that. The pictures we see, the moving footage we see of Fangio doesn't give enough, for me, has never given enough information really to be specific about that that question. But for me, Fangio, I'd take Sterling at his word there, so I'd put him up there as well. But Mark is absolutely right about that. But I would add classically Carlos Reutemann to that as well. He's one of the great Max Verstappen style short corner drivers of all time. Right, moving on. Where are we? Sheriff of Sandervoort. Hi there. Hi Peter. Hajar said he learned a lot just by watching Hamilton. Do you think his short cornering style could have come from studying Lewis closely? Yeah, probably. I mean, Lewis, and it's good to hear him say that. I don't know whether on Mark's list Lewis was there, but for me, Lewis was definitely a mega short corner driver up until the moment when he drove the 22 Merc and he realized that he had to get longer corners, brake in a straight line, just basically give himself a bigger sweet spot to get the tires into the right temperature, and that's how he did it. And he's still kind of doing that a little bit. And maybe I think Hajar would have noticed that. But to be honest with you, and I don't want to keep saying to be honest with you because I try to be honest all the time, but I think Hajar is a natural talent. And I think you can follow a driver and you can probably talk to him a little bit about it, but just watching him on TV, it'd be quite difficult for a Hajar. Well, I don't know, maybe Hajar thought, oh, look at Lewis going inside, I don't know, whoever. And Timo Glock in GP2, whatever. Look at the way he's going in early. And he probably thought, yeah, okay, I'm going to do that's the way I'm going to drive. Lots of early corners. So he would have noticed it with some of the other drivers we've mentioned as well. He's very good, Hajar, and he's very, very short corner, very, very quick. And as predicted, his teammate Liam Lawson, having had a great Grand Prix in Austria, then it kind of went away from him when he got to Silverstone, as we predicted, because instead of saying to himself, Austria, I learnt something, which is that if I've got a corner like turn 4, the downhill right-hander, to really help me shorten the corner, then that's what I need to be doing on normal, conventional corners. But he didn't think that way. He just thought, yeah, Austria, I was mega. I'll be good at Silverstone. Fast corners, go for it. And as predicted, it didn't work. Isaac Hajar. And, you know, big shunt at Silverstone, wasn't it? Very big shunt. And I made the point that in terrible conditions, visibility, Nigel Mansell passed so many cars to finish 5th in Portugal 85. And said after the race to me that he was doing that by listening to the engine note of the car in front, and when the guy backed off, he'd move either left or right. And of course, and I made the point to Cameron, that cannot be done today. And you have to put it under heading is, so therefore racing in that respect isn't quite as safe as it used to be, because the engine note of the car in front is quite an important thing if you're following it very closely. And of course, you can't hear it at all today, partly because the engines are quieter and partly because they've got so much insulation in their hearing for the radio and being able to hear everything very clearly. There's no way they can hear the engine note of the car in front. And that's, everybody just takes that for granted. Oh, well, that's it. But it's an important thing that's gone away. And I'm not sure many people think about that and talk about that. I'm not sure what the solution is. Solution is to go, and I say this in the context of Toyota, 2 years on with the development of their Rally 2 hydrogen-powered car, are going to be actually running it in one or two stages of the Rally of Finland, with Juha Kankkanen driving it, the deputy team principal, mega, and this is a great thing. It's virtually zero emissions, but it's a normal internal combustion engine making all the normal noises with hydrogen fuel. And Toyota alone, well, not alone, but they're the ones that have really gone out on a limb and said, this is, for us, this is the future. And from a motorsport perspective, where we all love noise, it's a great thing. And the day Toyota announced that this hydrogen car would be rallying was also the day that I was talking about Isaac Hadjar not being able to hear the engine note of the car in front of him and having the big shunt at Silverstone as a result. So I think, it's such a shame Formula One is going to even more electrification. Quieter engines even more. I think it's a shame. For me, it's all about noise. Well, to some extent. I don't want to my hearing's not too bad for my age, but, it's not good. And the worst thing was when you just sort of, it's after practice, and you're walking up and down the back of the garages and you're chatting to all the mechanics and annoying the team managers and distracting the mechanics and offering them a bag of chips or whatever. And you're chatting away, and then suddenly, without noticing it, because you're talking to one of them, the other guys just do a startup, a DFV Cosworth startup, 3 inches from where you're standing, no earplugs in. That's what gets your attention, and that's when your hearing is in trouble. So there you go. Alex G. Hello, Peter. Hope you're fine. Yeah, I am. Thank you very much. Do you agree on my thought that Oscar will come back much stronger? Well, yeah, and I made that point in the video. I think this is a bit of a turning point for the Oscar Piastri World Championship bid against Lando Norris, because he was well fired up by that, and I think Oscar in his first year in that situation at McLaren probably would have said, oh, okay, but this is year 2 and he's got a real chance of winning the championship. And I loved his reaction. He was never going to get that out of McLaren, but I thought it was good how he made it public. Okay, but I disagree with that 10-second penalty, and I think the team should be behind me on that, and therefore we should swap positions and race to the finish. Yeah, right. They were really going to do that, Oscar. But I give him 4 marks for trying on that one, definitely. So, Pratik Baroli. Hi, Peter. Are the wet tires useless now with the spray from the cars rendering very low visibility? Well, I don't know. I mean, it's the cars as well. It's the floors. It's the diffusers. It's not just the tires. And of course, Pirelli are in a difficult situation with the tires because if it's super wet, they tend not to run. And so the wet, extreme wet tires rarely get used. And then if you're doing an intermediate, you got to have a tire that's not bad in damp conditions when it's only drizzling, and got to be quite good when it's raining and they're still running. There's a big bandwidth of grip level that they have to cover with that intermediate tire. So it's a difficult one from their point of view. And I don't know what the answer is, other than that if it was a tyre war and we didn't have a tyre monopoly, of course you'd have, and then the regulations then freed up, you'd be able to build more different types of tyre. You'd have an intermediate, semi-intermediate, semi-slick, semi-wet, half-wet, quarter wet. So yeah, I'm not sure it's all tyres. I think that you've got to look a lot at the aero of the car as well. It's probably worse now than it's ever been, I think. Having said that, Silverstone's not a great circuit in the sense for the disbursement of standing water. Because there is a lot of standing water. It's pretty flat. It's an airfield, isn't it? So there's that issue as well. But, as soon as you mention tyres, the reason I sort of go like that is because, not the question, but because what can we do about it? We're in this Pirelli monopoly where and I reiterate the point, I think Formula One's actually quite fortunate to have Pirelli as a sponsor stroke tyre supplier. And it behoves the sport, really, technically, to make it life as easy as possible for Pirelli, i.e. to have to build as few tyres as possible and to require the least amount of technical development money on those tyres within the bandwidth, within the realm of the tyres doing the job and the racing being what Liberty and the FIA want it to be. So, and I think Pirelli do a pretty good job on that, don't they? Really. Patrick Barol also continues, I also didn't quite understand the idea of a formation lap behind the safety car. A bit too much hand holding there. Well, yeah, I mean, let's not be too harsh on them, because there was a time when they wouldn't even have had a standing start. We're going back even 3 or 4 years, they would have had a rolling start. So at least we had a standing start. So let's not be too tough on them, because they will just say, well, you know, what more do you want? We've done it already. We've delivered for you. Horner sacked, thoughts from review. Well, yeah, thoughts on that. I did express them at the start of the show. The news had just broken. And yeah, for me, there's a lot of unnecessary background stuff been going on with Christian. You're in that position. Obviously, it behoves you to, you know, to keep everything as clean as possible, and that was obviously not a good thing. But we all make mistakes, so who are we to judge? I suppose would be the right response to that. Beyond that, though, yeah, I think any racing person would know that if you're Christian and you've done a good job to hire Adrian Newey and keep Adrian Newey all these years, then to lose him is not good. You know, that's keeping him is keeping him, losing him is losing him. And I think that's the biggest thing. You know, if Adrian was still there, I think Red Bull would be a different team, different car. Max would have won more races and would be looking a lot stronger in the championship. I'm not saying he would be winning the championship, but I think there'd be a better team. And he's not there, and that's part of the problem. And other people have left too, you know, good people like Rob Marshall. So we'll see. I mean, I think also the whole Honda thing's been a bit strange, isn't it? Because I'm not saying this was Christian's fault or should reflect on Christian, but equally you have to question the whole thing, don't you? Honda doing their usual thing of deciding to pull out and then very quickly coming back in again with Aston Martin, as if there's some sort of subplot going on there, leaving Red Bull with a Ford deal around their own engine development program. So, you know, you could argue that really Christian should have ensured they had a seamless transition from 25 to 26, retaining Honda, and that didn't happen. I again, you know, I'm hesitant to say that's all Christian's fault. It might have been completely out of his hands, and it might be one of these classic Honda things where they just do things at the spur of the moment and then change their mind, like certain politicians out there. But you know, the main thing for me would be the Adrian thing, and a bit of a mess over the second driver too, isn't it? You know, the whole Checo Perez thing, will we keep him, will we not? And then replacing him with somebody who's clearly not as good as Perez twice over now, Yuki as well. And as I said at the time, you know, Perez, not the greatest driver when it comes to understeer, but pretty good when it comes to power application and looking after the rear tyres, but above all brings a lot of money to the team and is a good bloke. So why not keep him, was what I always thought, and they didn't. Again, whether or not that was Christian's decision or Red Bull's, I don't know. But I think it'll be a different team now, won't it? It'll be Laurent Mekies at Red Bull. They've probably got a worse car than Racing Bulls. So, you know, Max won't be happy. Well, maybe Max will be happy. I don't know. Maybe he's been wanting to see the back of Christian. I just don't know. I'm just speculating on that. But this might be, you know, Max's thing of, well, you know, we'll see how it goes. Give it another year. Ikena Ikiwi. Hi, Peter. If you were to put Max and Yuki in Racing Bull or a bog standard Formula One car, what do you think the gap over one lap? I know it's difficult to say. Well, it's only difficult to say because it depends on the car. It depends on the car. If it's an amazing car with phenomenal grip front and rear relative to the opposition and great balance, I think Max over one lap of a circuit like, say, Silverstone would be, I don't know, 0.2 quicker than Yuki. But if it's a car with imbalance and maybe a bit of bouncing and a little flick oversteer, as we've seen, which in other words the car they had at Silverstone, then it's going to be 0.6, 0.7, because Max is just able to create a sweet spot that he can use in order to adjust the pedals at exactly the right rate for the variables around him. A very good point is pole lap in the dirty air of Kimi Antonelli going into Copse. He lifted just the right amount to get the car absolutely perfect, and he was still quickest. What everybody says about Max is running so much, took so much wing off for qualifying, and that's what hurt him in the race. Don't forget that he was quickest through Copse Corner in qualifying with no wing, if that's how you want to phrase it. Unbelievable. That was just astounding to me. Again, from the same person, Ikenna. Also, why have Pirelli struggled with the production of a good wet tyre over the past couple of years? We've had diffusers for decades. It's absurd we can't race with full wets. Well, yeah, I mean, that's chicken and egg, isn't it? Because generally speaking, they don't race when it's so wet that they have to run full wets. And it's not because the full wets are not good enough. It's because of the standing water or the standing spray contained on a pit straight with the grandstands on one side and the pit complex on the other. Paddock Club. Blame the Paddock Club. So it's not just Pirelli's inability to make the tyres. It's that when it gets to be dangerous, what they consider to be dangerous, which is standing water, visibility, and unpredictability of the water movements, then they tend not to race. They send out the safety car. So from Pirelli's point of view, if you're sitting there if you're an accountant at Pirelli thinking, how much do we want to spend on the development of wet tyres, somebody's going to say, well, we don't use the wet tyres very much, and when it's that wet, they don't race anyway. So we're talking about the extreme wet. So, that's the situation they're in. So, where are we going now? We used to have a monsoon tyre, says somebody. I don't know whether I've gone... Okay, Red Bull somebody's saying Red Bull self-destruct mode. Red Bull, yeah, it's Wolf's Wondering says Red Bull in self-destruct mode. Oh well, maybe. We'll see, I suppose. I mean, the next thing will be Max announcing that he's going to go to Aston or Mercedes or something. I was talking about the noise of the engines, and the Desert Kiwi, hello mate, says remember the V8s at Sepang, blown eardrums. Yeah, lots of laughs. Well, yeah, and those things were safe in a way because you could hear what the guy in front was doing, particularly in the wet. Bono Bronc, Peter knows you talked about Horner in the beginning of this live. Yeah, I did, but I'm happy if people aren't going to watch the whole thing. That's for sure. So I'm happy to reiterate it. I think Christian Horner's he's had a good innings. He probably needs a rest. B, he's got a big court case coming up, I think, over that whole business, the private life business that I won't go into. And thirdly, which is not good though for somebody in his position, obviously. And thirdly, the whole Adrian Newey thing and collapse of performance of the car, not good, eh? And I think there's some. I think also you got to add letting Jonathan Wheatley go. I think that's part of it. Why didn't Christian do a better job of looking after Jonathan Wheatley and promoting him? And I think it's a sign of weakness in a way of your weak management anyway, when you don't promote somebody who's doing an extremely good job. And you tend to think, oh no, I don't want to give that guy too much power because it might affect the way people think about me or whatever. I'm not saying for sure Christian did that, but I find it very odd that Jonathan Wheatley, who was just part of Red Bull as Christian Horner was moved to make that change to his life and go to Sauber, and what a great job he's doing there, based on all his great racing experience. And I don't know, to me, if I was in Christian's position, there's no way in the world I would have let Jonathan Wheatley go. any more than I would have let Dickie Stanford go when I was at Williams as team manager. And not that there's the same. Dickie Stanford is not Jonathan Wheatley, one different roles, but not that far apart actually. Both similar feel, very simple approach to racing, uncomplicated, not simple, uncomplicated. Just get on with the job and get people working the right way and not coming down on people if something goes wrong. If you take a risk and you try something and it doesn't work, in racing you have to say, okay, it didn't work, no problem, relax. And you don't want any shouting and screaming, you don't want recriminations. And I think, you know, Jonathan's got that ability and several others have. And anyway, go back to the point. I think Christian should not have let Jonathan Wheatley go. He should not have let Christian Horner go. Sorry, he should not have let, getting so many Christian Horners here, should not have let Adrian Newey go. And I don't think he should have replaced Perez either. So there we go. Sarah, going back to Sarosh again, says, Peter, maybe Leclerc should be told not to think and just drive when things happen. We've done that question. Try not to ask him again because it's a bit confusing for me, in my brain, the size of my brain. The Desert Kiwi, Oscar's faster than Norris. Yeah, I'd go along with that. Yep. Okay. E-Ride Ibiza says, hit the like button, people. Thank you very much. That's very kind. Thank you. We used to have a monsoon tyre. Yeah, we did. So, Sarosh says, Max, even while reacting to the vehicle losing grip, looked so controlled and didn't look rushed at all when he was defending against the McLarens. What a driver. Yeah, yeah. And that's the problem with Max. One of the problems for commentators when you're watching Max is that he always makes the car look pretty good, a bit like Alonso, really. It's always sort of square to the road, looking nice. And then he gets out of the car and says, the car was undrivable, terrible understeer, flick oversteer, no brakes, throttle lag, gear shift slow. You have to, you know, he does a good job polishing over the cracks. Yeah, I may be, this is 413 to Mako Road. There used to be full wets. I mean, this is me, typical, isn't it? Because I tend not to look at those details because I think it's so ludicrous, the whole thing anyway, in many ways, the whole tyre regulation stuff. Maybe they don't even have the full wets anymore. I don't know. I haven't looked. I should know that. But anyway, that's why they don't. Yeah, Susie Perry's sent a very nice message, but I'm not going to read it out because it's too embarrassing. Gibby CH says, if Lando doesn't win the championship this season, does he consider leaving for Red Bull if Max leaves for a different team, or would he remain McLaren's golden boy even with a champion teammate? Well, you know, it's a difficult one. He has signed a long-term contract, I think, wasn't it? So he signed that, and I remember saying at the time, I'm a bit shocked by that because that means he's kind of locking himself into a teammate as quick as Oscar Piastri. But anyway, he loves Zach and he's got the money and the brand, and McLaren love him and everything's wonderful. Glad, happy. But as you say, it won't be so glad, happy if Oscar wins the championship. And then his thoughts will turn back to Hungary last year when he gave Oscar that win, I guess. And he'll think, I've had enough of this. But you know, to go to Red Bull, they'd have to buy him out of his McLaren contract. There'd be a lot of money to Zach on that one, and quite a big deal to do that, I think. I think McLaren are quite capable of saying to Lando, if he does lose to Oscar, oh, yeah, but your championship in 26. But of course, hollow words, because who knows what the McLaren's going to be like in 26 any more than we know what the Ferrari or the Mercedes or the Red Bull are going to be like in 26. Completely new regulations. Should be okay. Mercedes engine, you know, difficult to imagine them getting it completely wrong. But nonetheless, he's still got Oscar Piastri to beat in the other car. And if he's beaten him this year, he's going to beat him potentially the following years as well, isn't he? S-Space Ghost says, how is Max going to handle the pressures when they ask him about Horner? I think he's going to say, well, you know, I wish Christian all the best. We had a great time. Great era, and I thought to thank him very much for all he's done for me and for the team, and we wish him best. End of comment. And he'll duck out of the interview, I would imagine. Isn't that what he's going to say? Maxwell says, hello Peter, why is there so much hatred towards Piastri, decrying him as a sore loser in the comments of many videos now? Are they? Well, I'm not, and I can only speak for myself. I don't watch all the other videos, so all I can say is I was refreshingly surprised at his cool reaction to the whole thing and wanting there to be a race to the finish with Lando. And I thought he was totally correct in that. Obviously, he braked incredibly hard. I mean, 60 pounds per square inch is a lot from the speed he was going. And he was at the front of the field, and it was wet. And everybody else had to brake really hard as a result. But again, you've got to see that in the context of other similar maneuvers. The George one in the dry in Canada, less pedal pressure, but different situation, different variables. Oscar's point that he'd done a similar thing on previous laps and no issue with that. Yes, the safety car lights had just been switched off and slightly different regulations come into play. But, you know, there have been other instances of pole guys suddenly braking and things going on without 10-second penalties. And if they're going to be that draconian about it, with a 10-second penalty, which is a lot, then they need to be more specific about the rule that is being broken. They can't just say driving erratically and braking too hard, because they're all just relative terms, in my opinion. And that's all comes out of the heading of, I don't like this whole business of crimes and penalties either. I think it's disproportionate. As I said at the front of the video, all the crimes are very wishy-washy and poorly written and described, with many variables potentially coming into play, and all the penalties are very, very draconian and precise, based on a broad band of rubbish. And I think that's basically what Oscar was thinking and saying. You know, how do we know that it was particularly dangerous compared with other stuff that's been going on? And we need the chance to talk about that, and on the basis that McLaren might think that should agree with me, let's race to the finish. And I think he was right to give that a go. I really do. Wilf's Wanderings, very kindly a super chat from him as well. Thanks, Wilf. I don't think it's a question there, mate. I think it's just Wilf's Wanderings. Thank you very much. Very kind. But I don't know why there would be hatred towards Piastri. I mean, it's a terrible thing to see that word hatred in there. I hope there isn't, because he's a super cool guy who has got a very good racing brain and is a true racer, in my opinion. You know, he sizes everything up from the point of view of being a race driver. And yeah, he's done some silly things. I think, you know, Hungary last year, first lap was not good, and first corner, and this is another one. But you know, if he sees George Russell getting away with what George did in Canada, I guess he's going to think, well, Silverstone brake temperatures are much colder. We've got to give an even more pressure. I'm going to do what George did. And that's the problem, you know, the imbalance, the iniquity between one race and another, and there's no consistency. And the fact that the English driver won the British Grand Prix as a result probably has brought a whole new fan battle war, created a new fan war, whatever. So it's not good. Not good at all. I don't think Oscar will I think Oscar will be very good at not being a part of any of that, and he'll just switch off and just focus on Spa. And he'll be thinking about was right, I'm going to blitz Spa, win the Belgian Grand Prix, start to finish from the pole, no problem. And every other race this year, that's what he'll be thinking. Won't happen, of course, every race, but that's what he'll be thinking. He's a very cool guy like that. Siddharth Garg says Max is going to 100% stay with Red Bull now. Really? You think there was that much bad blood between Max and Christian Horner? Interesting. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Is there that much love for Laurent Mekies? And does he think Laurent's going to be able to get Adrian back to Red Bull? Imagine if that happened. Imagine if Laurent goes to Red Bull, goes into Christian's office, and a day later they announce that Jonathan Wheatley and Adrian Newey are both returning to Red Bull, and Honda. They're cancelling their engine program with Aston Martin. They've signed a new 10-year deal with Max Verstappen, and they're keeping Honda, Adrian, and Jonathan Wheatley all at Red Bull. Yeah, right. AVVC says, okay, Horner will be at Ferrari before you know it, replacing Freddie Vasseur, well, yeah, maybe they think a little bit the way they thought, well, if we get Sebastian Vettel with his 4 world championships, he's bound to win 4 world championships for us, and didn't. They're probably thinking, well, if Horner's won 27 world championships or whatever it is, he's going to win the same number for us, even though we've got the same car and the same engineers. But Horner's a magician. Maybe they think that. So, Ryan Murphy thinks he's off to Cadillac, and they will try for Oscar at Cadillac. Wow. Tomako Road 143 says Red Bull are going to make their own ICE machines next year. Well, yeah, as they do now, but they do it in collaboration with Honda, and next year they're doing it in collaboration with Ford. But of course, yeah, that's all done by Red Bull, as in their powertrain division, run by Phil Prue, good man, ex-McLaren race engineer, was at Mercedes then for quite a long time, and now he's at Red Bull, so he's a good man. Mahir Anand, what do you think about Max going to Mercedes? Yeah, I think it definitely would be on, if you're Mercedes, you'll definitely be out there talking to Max Verstappen, for sure. If you're Max Verstappen, you'd definitely be talking to Mercedes whenever they want to talk to you. Now, as I've said before, logically, nobody knows what is going to happen in 26 in terms of the scale of power of the teams. Who's going to be quick? Who's going to be slow? The odds are that Aston Martin will have a very good car. The odds are that Mercedes will have a reasonable car, probably a good one. Therefore, McLaren will as well. Ferrari maybe, a bit more of a question mark, I would think. So if you're Max, you want the surefire bet for 2026, and you're thinking of leaving Red Bull now, the surest bet with the least downside would be Aston Martin, 1-year contract with options, but leave the door open in case Mercedes have got the best car, and then you can go to Mercedes for 27. That would be what Max would be looking to do if he wanted to leave Red Bull and didn't believe in Red Bull anymore. So that's what I would do. That's what I think he should do. So Wolvera88 says Horner to Alpine. They want a new team principal, and he wants part ownership, has experience. Yeah, he could go there, but haven't they got enough people now? They've got Steve Nilsson as the new managing director. They've got the great Flavio there. So, that's the team principal job kind of sewn up already, isn't it? And what would Horner bring that Steve Nilsson couldn't bring? Steve's very good man, very good guy. So they may well do that. It wouldn't be very clever, but they might do that. And he wants part ownership. Well, yeah. Well, go and do his own team then. Maybe Max team gave them an ultimatum, Bob. Everybody's assuming that Max doesn't like Christian Horner because they read so much social media stuff, don't they? We don't know that. They should have kept Checo, says the Desert Kiwi. Well, yeah, I've said that a few times today. Gent next door. I don't want Horner at my beloved Ferrari. The man has no principles. Okay, well, there you go. 35, meaning Joss. Okay. Athkumar Nair. Why with immediate effect? Isn't a bit disrespectful? Well, yeah, it is pretty disrespectful because it suggests there's been something since the British Grand Prix and today that's happened that would require that. So, I don't know. It's a weird thing, isn't it? Maybe it's something to do with the court case and how that's going to go. And there's been a bit of sort of groundswell of info from that area. Bob says, Max will 100% leave, but I think he might wait and see who has a good car next year. Well, how's he going to do that? If he's going to 100% leave, how can he wait till next year? You mean leave next year, leave at the end of 26? Yeah, I think. Unless, of course, Red Bull have a very good car in 26. So, is Dexter there? There he is. What's going on? Dex, come on. Come on. Breakfast. Dexter, come on. Dexter, come on. He's too happy sitting here listening to the show. He's desperate to know what happens with Christian Horner. Klatu Zogran says, I wonder if Horner will now spill the beans about Red Bull's secret brakes. Really? Whatever they are, it's not as secret as McLaren's, I wouldn't have thought. They're saying any chance Joss will take over. That would be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah, I don't think that'll happen. Respect for Horner's achievements, please. Mouse down. Yep. Well, I did begin the show by saying that. We shouldn't forget how... I mean, Jackie Stewart said, in his opinion, he's the best team principal he'd ever seen. And all those years. I mean, as I say, the big achievement was to get Adrian to go there and then to get the best from Adrian for so long. His worst achievement was to let Adrian go. Why has Alonso struggled so far this season against Stroll? That's a good question. As I read it, it clicks. I'm just trying to read the name of the person. Sorry. Anyway, I'll answer that while I'm scrolling. Well, partly, as we saw at Silverstone, if you don't qualify very well, you've got more tyre options going into the race. And Fernando tends to use up all these good tyres just getting that dog of a car through to Q3. So that's part of the reason. I don't think he has shown up very well. I mean, if you look at the stats between Stroll and Vettel, the stats between Stroll and Alonso's much better than Vettel against Stroll. So I don't think Stroll's look pretty good occasionally on a Friday, but very unusual for him to carry that through to a Sunday. Yeah, he had a pretty good race for a while at Silverstone, then it all got away from him. But yeah, generally, Alonso's had him, I think, would be my response to that. Another super chat. Will the climate, this is from Joachim Carlin, thank you very much. Will the climate be less hard in Red Bull now that Horner's gone? Well, it depends what you mean by hard. I think the car will still be the same. I don't see how Lauren Mecchi was going to make it a quicker car. Yeah, unless there's an engineer out there who's the next Adrian Newey, who nobody in the engineering department is really giving an opportunity to, because they're a bit scared of him. And Lauren can see that and goes in and gives this guy the freedom that he needs in order to, or woman, to do the job. Then, short of that, I don't see how there's any magic going to be happening there. Anyway, that question about Alonso was from Thomas. Thank you. Nico Teen Rosberg. Laurent Mecchi's takes over. Yeah. So far, it's going to be like a temporary role, but like all these things, it'll probably morph into a real thing. Sean M. Is true Horner was sacked? Well, it's true Horner's leaving, and they're saying with immediate effect, so kind of comes under the heading of sack, doesn't it? Doesn't look very good. And a lot of history there. Equally, a lot of weird things have been happening over the last 18 months, so none of this really a surprise, I say. And also the loss of Dietrich Mateschitz as well. I think Christian had a direct line there to Dietrich, and there was certainly a lot of trust there in terms of Christian looking him in the eye and saying, we've got to have Adrian Newey, whatever it takes. And when Adrian turns up for the meeting, Dietrich basically saying, yeah, whatever it takes, do it. And that, from that moment, I think there was that very special bond between Christian and Dietrich, and now that's gone, obviously. And and we move on, which is always not a good thing necessarily, certainly not from Christian's point of view. Momika Baba says, I'm not sure if this has been answered, but in your podcast with Cameron, you said that you thought Oscar's penalty was unfair. Do you think he still should have been penalised in some way? Thank you. Well, I've talked a lot about this. I'm very happy to keep talking about it because it's a very important point. A lot of people out there thinking that it's rigged and the penalty was given at the wrong time to the wrong driver, and that as a result of that his teammate went on to win the British Grand Prix and it's all rigged and they've lost interest in the World Championship. Quite a lot of people, I mean, got a reasonable number of contacts around the world now, quite a lot of people saying that to me, this is disgusting. And most are making the point that what he did was really no different from George Russell's manoeuvre when he was leading the Canadian Grand Prix with Max behind him, behind the safety car. Of course, there was a difference in pedal pressure applied. One was 30, one was approximately 60 psi, so double in the case of Oscar Piastri, and it was wet, so you could argue it was even more dangerous in the Oscar situation because it was wet, there was less grip, and braking hard like that concertinaed right down through to the back of the field. Everybody had to brake hard as a result. So it was a dangerous manoeuvre. Not dangerous. It was a manoeuvre definitely worthy of probably a penalty. Yeah, but you have to see it in the context of other manoeuvres and other things that drivers have got away with lesser penalties. And this is, and I began my video, began the live stream today, saying the problem we've got is that we've got all these potential crimes, which by definition, if you try to imagine and describe every potential crime that could take place in a Grand Prix, you're never going to do it, because there are so many grey areas, so many things different from circuit to circuit, so many things in there changeable because of the weather or the track conditions or the tyres that are on, whatever it is. There's a million things that can change. And yet on the other side of the column, you've got all these penalties, which specifically cover about 9 different potentialities. And that's, to me, completely wrong in the sport. We shouldn't have that. And if Kimi Antonelli can get a 3-place grid penalty at the next race for on cold brakes locking up and taking out another car on the second proper corner of the Austrian Grand Prix from high-speed braking, and basically get a relatively lenient penalty, why did Oscar Piastri get a 10-second penalty when he's behind the safety car, basically doing 50, 60 kilometers an hour, actually, by the time he'd done his braking? And so that to me, there's definitely an inequality there. And you could argue, I think, that we've had this rule now that if you come in, once the penalty's been given, a time penalty, and you come in for pits, it has to be served in the pits. Then it's done and it's over. There's no discussion. Why couldn't they have said, 3-place grid penalty for Oscar Piastri at the next race? This will be looked at by the stewards after the race, open to appeal. Why couldn't they do that on the basis that a similar thing had happened with George Russell in Canada? And I think that is the point. And Oscar also made the point that he'd done a similar thing on previous laps and nobody complained about it at all. Yet now the lights were off on the safety car. It was a different thing. And the rules are slightly different. You're not allowed to drive erratically and all this stuff. But, I think it's the inequality from one race to another, from one incident to another, that is the bad thing here, the wrong thing here. And so I don't say it was wrong for Oscar to get a penalty. What I say is that the system is wrong, and it shouldn't have been a fait accompli the way it was. Something like that. When you're leading a Grand Prix like that, and it's wet, and there's all sorts of things going on, and the other side of the coin is you don't brake that hard if it's wet because there's less adhesion. On the other side of the coin, the brakes are even colder, so you do need to give it more brake pedal pressure to get the brake temperatures up. And then again, there's all that business of the safety car anyway. I know this is a fairly existential point now, but we have safety cars in Formula One basically because back in the day it was felt that it was a good way of bunching up the field and restarting the race, and it was great for the fans, great for television. Another restart. Even though Oscar early on was leading by 15 seconds or something, and just saw that 15-second gap disappear overnight because it was the first safety car, or maybe it was even in that safety car period. He was a big lead at that point. Why don't they use the virtual safety car more? None of this would be an issue if they use the virtual safety car more. Now, we tend to think in this super safety conscious era that we put the safety car out because it's a really difficult, bad situation, and it's going to take a long time, and it's very dangerous for the cars to be going around even in virtual safety car mode. Well, reduce the speeds or do whatever. What's going on at the moment is clearly not working because there are so many grey areas of what is erratic, of what is dangerous, of how much you're allowed to brake, of how much you're not allowed to brake. I mean, do they actually have a limit to what you can use on the brake pedal pressure? Of course they don't, because it's different from car to car, tire to tire, compound to compound. You couldn't do that. But if they're going to be precisely give them a 10-second penalty, it's got to be against something that's relatively precise as well. And to me, the virtual safety car thing works really well. And I suspect the main reason they don't use the VSC more often is because they don't think it's quite as good for television. They don't think it's as dramatic as a safety car restart. And that's wrong. You know, they shouldn't put the show in front of what is actually best for the sport. I think a virtual safety car is a brilliant thing, and you know, they should use it more. That's my opinion. Obviously, you know, you can still bring him in the pit lane there, and you'd still be subject to the pit lane speed limit under BSC. You don't need the safety car to do all that. And I'll tell you something else, the reason they love the safety car, they probably make quite a lot of money out of the safety car too, and the endorsements they get from Merck and Aston, and they want to make sure it's deployed fairly regularly. Not good, is it? Use the BSC more. So, Horner to Alpine, yeah. Max will 100% leave. Double Mint GG says, look, let's be real. Christian would not be out of the door if Max wanted him to stay. Simple as. Yeah, I think that's probably right. Are you saying that he wanted Perez to leave as well? That's the only thing I'd say in counter to that. But I think you're probably right. Christian, they probably said to Max, yeah, I think the time has come. And he's probably, you know, if Racing Bulls weren't going as well as they were and Lauren Meckies wasn't looking as good as he is, Max might not be quite as ready to endorse that. But the fact that Meckies can come in, a bit of a breath of fresh air for Max, then, you know, he knows there's a straightaway, got a half reasonable, or pretty good replacement. So there we go. Okay, and I'm getting. So Alex M says, Peter, on your way to the Nürburgring, this is the road trip I'm doing starting tomorrow up to Estonia for the Rally of Estonia. We're not going to rush it. We're just going to take it easy, look at all the great motor racing sites on the way. And Alex M says, but on the way to the ring, you should stop at the Schumacher Kart Center in Kerpen, Germany. It's legit. I'll race you there. I've actually been there, I think. It's where I actually saw him racing karts there in Kerpen when he went back and did a race one year when he was at Ferrari. I remember Nico was racing. I think Vitantonio Luzzi was there, karting. Yeah, it was a brilliant thing. And I was watching with Michael from the control tower thing there, and we were watching Nico. And Nico was sort of... And I said, oh, wow, it just drives just like his old man, Michael. He said, really? How did his old man drive? We had a big discussion about Keke versus Nico. Quite funny. So, Sema Dragon, will Ferrari get Horner? They might. As I say, they might fall into the belief that he can work magic there. Even though you'll have the same... The magic will be, if somebody can take Adrian Newey out of Aston Martin and Andy Cowell and bring them with him, that's some pretty good magic. Or Jonathan Wheatley. I mean, if I was Ferrari, I'd actually be trying to get Jonathan Wheatley right now. There's a bit of a link there, isn't there? They use Ferrari engines still at Sauber, yeah. So that would be the thing. If you're going to get anybody right now, you'd get Jonathan Wheatley to go to Ferrari. But I don't think he'll do that because he's very happy where he is. You know, did a slightly better job than Ferrari at the British Grand Prix with the same engine, didn't they? So Lewis Martin, it's a depressing question, says, is Formula One dead next year? No, it's not dead. It's all electrification, 50% electrified, much quieter engines. And we don't know who's going to be quick and who's going to be slow. It's going to be wonderful. No, it'll be all right. It'll be the same old, won't it? And there'll be some new guys in there doing well. The Isaac Hadjars and the Ollie Bermans. There's a thing for you. Ollie Berman is looking pretty good, isn't he? You know, you got to think he's got half a chance at Ferrari at some point, going back to Ferrari, racing a Ferrari again. Paul Gilbert says, how much gardening leave will Horner have to take before he can manage any other team? I don't know. I haven't seen his contract. I don't think anybody else has. A few people will speculate about that. But I think when you are dismissed as of now, maybe it affects the contract, which specifies, you know, this contract ends at this date, and beyond that date you can't do any work for. If you're just fired immediately, maybe it makes everything else null and void. I don't know. It'd be a good unless you see the contract, you wouldn't know. Dan Marino says, hi from Texas. Hi there. Very sad to hear about all the floods there, and thoughts are with all families that have lost loved ones there. Terrible thing. Bob says, I don't think Red Bull will last in Formula One now. Well, that's another question, isn't it? I've often said, even when Dietrich was with us, that having a huge sponsorship platform like that, in which they own 2 teams and spend vast amount in racing in general, basically in the hands of one man who may decide tomorrow that he's just had enough and doesn't want to do it, is a bit risky, isn't it? And now he's sadly gone, and different people, Bean Counter's probably in there as well as the son, who's a good guy it seems, but nonetheless he will have different motivations. He's, you know, he's not a part of the era where Red Bull grew up with Sauber and then became Red Bull Formula One team. He kind of has come in from the back door and seen it all, and maybe he'll think, oh, you know, I love skydiving and water skiing, that's what we should be doing. It's, you know, maybe they will. I mean, because the odds of them ever dominating Formula One again the way they have, pretty small now, I would say, especially if Max leaves. Stefan Johnson, not Stefan Johansson, I have to say, Stefan Johnson. Maybe we should talk about the rookie massacre at Silverstone. So, not, yeah, if you look at the results, the sort of let's hear it for the Lewises and the Nicos, wasn't it? So, yeah, the rookie, I mean, for me, though, Behrman's qualifying lap was one of the best qualifying laps of the year. I think that was just brilliant lap. Yeah, Isaac didn't have a great race. Who else was there? Oh yeah, Bortoletto and Colapinto. Colapinto again might as well not have been there. I just wish I keep looking at Instagram only to look at the Jack Doohan news, and Jack's there on his bike cycling away and having a laugh and doing this. And I just hope we're going to see him back in the car. I mean, he's a racer. He's a very good guy, Jack Doohan. Such a shame to see him not in that Alpine. Having said that, Pierre Gasly said after the Austrian Grand Prix that was the worst Grand Prix car he'd ever driven in his life, was the after Austria. So I'm not sure, you know, not sure Jack's missing that much right now. Hopefully the car will get better. With Steve there and a few others, I think it will. So wouldn't it be brilliant if Jack came back just when the car started to get a little bit better again? Bob says, if Max leaves and the car is bad next year, I can see Red Bull pulling out and selling. Yep. Yeah, why would they stay? I agree with that. So then there's a lot of people just echoing this. So if Horner's getting fired, does that mean Max is going to stay? I don't think was all that. I mean, I can't believe Max is thinking, oh, now if Horner's gone, the car's bound to be quick and I'm going to stay at Red Bull now forevermore. Brilliant. Car's going to be brilliant. Why would he think that? It's like Horner's nothing to do with the development of the car. Nothing. So, you know, if Adrian Newey was coming back, or Rob Marshall, or you know, or other stuff going on, it would be different technical stuff. But Christian isn't. If Max is thinking that way, then I'll be very surprised and disappointed, actually. James Skinner says Red Bull is effectively finished. David Joe Klotz. Alan Permain is the new Alpine team principal. Excellent choice. Is he? Huh. I didn't know that. Because he was at Racing Bulls. When did that happen? I think Steve Nilsson has just gone there as managing director under Flavio Briatore. Anyway, going back to Alan Permain, very good man as ever. One of the top guys at Racing Bulls, like Jonathan Eddles, and one of the reasons that team is so good. Alan Permain should get a lot of credit for that. But as it happens, Lauren Mekies is getting a lot of credit for that. But then maybe he was the guy that I hired Alan Permain. So there you go. Alan's very, very good. You're right. So what was moving on? 35. It won't be the end of Red Bull Sports. They're involved in nearly every single sport on the planet. Yeah, well, they created a whole lot of sports, didn't they, as well? Lots of sports I've never even heard of. If you go to their media hub, whatever it is, Red Bull Hub, it's very good, actually. There's so much stuff there. Surfing is brilliant, the surfing stuff they do. I love it. So a lot of people talking about Red Bull. And So Horner, yeah. Which of the other teams are most likely to be interested in Horner? Bono Bronc. Everybody's thinking Horner's desperately going to be wanting to continue. Would he? I mean, he's not exactly 25. He's had a very, very intense and successful Formula One career with a large number of rocky moments as well. And now he's presumably got lots of money, beautiful house, family. Wouldn't he want to just chill out and then 4 or 5 years from now see what's there? Maybe look at some sort of presidential role in some respect. Isn't that that's what I would do? But I mean, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he's desperate to go to another team now. Thomas, people often talk about Red Bull exiting Formula One, but not only are they still in Formula One, but they have 2 teams. Yeah, well, exactly. I think they've been wanting to sell. I think the second team's been for sale for the last 10 years. It's just that nobody wants to buy it because it's a very expensive proposition to run a team out of Italy. And as Andretti has shown, if you're going to do a team, you're much better off doing your own team from scratch rather than paying $750 million to somebody for their team and then having to spend another $750 million to get it off the ground. So, yeah, that whole business of the value of the teams and selling the franchise, it's taken a bit of a hit because of what Cadillac and Andretti are doing. And if you're Gene Haas now, you're thinking, yeah, okay, my team has got to be worth whatever, $500 million or 400 million, whatever you would think. But is somebody ever going to buy that? You know, that's the problem. So a lot of people are saying Horner to Ferrari. I'm not convinced. Well, I'm not convinced, obviously, but for me, that would be, okay, what's Christian going to be able to do at Ferrari that Freddie Vasseur is not doing at Ferrari right now? You know, I don't even know if he speaks Italian, does he? So, I mean, why would he suddenly, as I say, if he arrives with Adrian under his wing again, or Rob Marshall, or a few very good engineering people from other teams, yeah. But if you're not going to do that, the problem Ferrari got is engineering in the car. It's not anything else. Yeah, some mismanagement in the pit wall and everything, yeah, but Christian he wouldn't even tidy that up because look what happened to Red Bull in Spain. Disaster. So there's, why? Why would you do any of that? Review says, hi Peter, Max spends a lot of time on iRacing. How much do you think that helps his touch and feel with the wheel? Does that kind of time strain sensitivity in car control like his Spain save this year? I think it does sharpen up his wheel movements, probably. It's probably pretty accurate knowing the setup Max has got. I should think it's pretty good for his hand-eye coordination in that respect. I don't think it has any bearing on what he does with his footwork, though. And I would say what you're seeing in Formula One with Max, with his saves and with just balancing the car on a knife edge when it's looking absolutely stable and yet inside he's got a million things going on, I would say at least 60% of that is footwork, not handwork. And I don't think iRacing helps with the footwork because footwork is very much related to load, whereas the handwork is related to vision and hand-eye coordination. So yeah, if you accept iRacing for what it is, a very good way of keeping the hands sharp and the steering, I think it's pretty good. But don't confuse it with balancing the car going into cops at 300 kilometers an hour with not much wing on it, because that's when it's all about footwork. Jack Scam says, imagine this Hamilton Horner versus Max Toto. Imagine this. Hamilton Horner versus Max Toto. Yeah. So, stop apologizing. That's the name of this person. I reckon they lost Verstappen, and that was the final straw for Christian. Oh, that's an interesting take. Christian said, oh, well, if Max is going to Merck or Aston or whatever, I'm out of here. I'm not going to run this team for Isaac Hadjar and Liam Lawson. Yeah, maybe it's that. That's a new spin on it. Bob says, I'm English and Oscar's my guy. Well, yeah, he's a racer, isn't he? But then, effectively, Australia, England, all one and the same, isn't it? Yeah, right. Well, that's good to hear you, Bob, being so generous there. And it's good, we should respect talent for what it is rather than what nationality is wrapping it, is enveloping the talent. It's all about talent, and Oscar's got plenty of that. And he deserves to have billions of fans around the world because he's a very, very good driver, a good bloke, and a very good example of how Formula One drivers should behave, I think. And I don't think he ranted and raved and sulked after the race. I think he just showed his displeasure. He said on the radio what he felt should have happened, and now he will have put it behind him. You think Oscar's thinking about Silverstone now? Nah. He's probably looking at the news thinking, oh, Christian Horner's leaving. Yeah, okay. All right, mate, let's go. And then all he's thinking about is Spa. He's thinking about Pouhon. He's thinking about Blanchimont. He's thinking about where he's going to break into La Source if he's got Lando right behind him. He's thinking of the first lap if he's on the pole, first lap if he's on the front row but on the other side. He's thinking about all those things as he's driving around in his road car or in the shower or doing whatever he's doing. So he's just a racer. I'm not saying all the other Formula One drivers aren't either, but Oscar's much more low-key when it comes to being out there. He just, gets on with his life, doesn't he? Good bloke. I've never, ever agreed that it was the right thing to leave Alpine when he did, the way he did, because I'm of a generation where, Jackie Stewart did not have a written contract with Ken Tyrrell, and it was nothing but trust, and here's Alpine announcing him as a race driver. And he still walked away from it and went to McLaren. And I've always made the point that if it was a straight option between Alpine and McLaren, you would go to McLaren. Obviously, no brainer. But he did have an obligation at Alpine, and Alpine, in my opinion, did give him quite a lot of stuff. Not all that he wanted, and it wasn't in writing, and there were a lot of things that did not stand up under legal microscopes. But I still think that from a long-term sporting perspective, the right thing would have been to stay at Alpine and then maybe leave at the end of that year. And he would have got a decent drive either at McLaren or somewhere else the following year. Anyway, apart from that, I think he's a wonderful guy and wonderful racing driver. I love watching him drive. He's Alan Jones. If anybody, well, I'm sure very few of you were around in 1979, 1980, and to some extent 81, when Alan was at his peak in the Williams, and you wanted to know what he was like to watch, go and watch Oscar Piastri, because this is exactly the same style, just unbelievably quick and very, very very, very confident use of the rear of the car on fast corners. But could never match Carlos when the front end was good. He could never match Carlos in terms of turn in and what Carlos was doing. But when it was, the old club corner at Silverstone, Alan Jones, 1979 Williams FW07, what you saw then was what you see with Oscar Piastri today. Trail Break 3, yes, Red Bull had 2 winning eras with Seb and Mad Max. Demonoroth. If it was up to me, I'd have hired Pierre Wache instead of Horner. Wache is much more responsible for the horrible car than Horner. Well, yeah, I mean, you're hitting the nail on the head there. It's actually the technology that's the problem at Red Bull, just as it's the problem at Ferrari and Mercedes, for that matter. And these team principals are only as good as the engineers that they have working below them. But it's not quite as simple as that, because there's a way of getting the engineers to work together, and there's a way of getting the engineers not to work together of your team. And there's also a way of getting the right engineers to the team at the right moment. And Christian did that for a long time at Red Bull with Adrian. But he doesn't have that now. Ferrari don't have that now. Mercedes don't have that now. McLaren do. McLaren have done a very good job of getting the best from the whole Adrian Newey era without actually getting Adrian. It's amazing, actually. And I give a lot of credit to Rob Marshall for that. I think he's got a really good racing brain. And it's no coincidence. I think he was the first guy Adrian hired ever. Certainly when he went to Red Bull, the first guy he hired was Rob Marshall. Marcel's another one going down the same tunnel now. Marcel Tunison says, did Red Bull sack Horner because Max signed with Mercedes and they blame Horner? Well, it's an interesting point because I said, immediate effect, dismissal with immediate effect, implies that something's taken place since the British Grand Prix when he was still working for Red Bull. So maybe it is, Max has done something like that. Why is everybody assuming it's Mercedes? Why wouldn't it be Aston Martin? That's what I don't get. If he's going to give up not knowing what the Red Bull's like in 26, he just doesn't want to be there anymore, why isn't he going to go to the team with the least possible downside? Honda. He knows all the Honda people. He knows the powertrain people. He knows Andy Cowell, who's running the engine program, because of the job he did for Mercedes. He's never worked with him, but he knows how good Andy Cowell is. He knows Adrian like the back of his hand. Adrian knows Max like the back of his hand. The Strolls have got more money than Mercedes worldwide, probably. I'm exaggerating slightly, but you get my gist. Why wouldn't he go there on a one-year deal, which I'm sure he could do because it's his terms, isn't it? And then go to Mercedes if they've got a great car, as I said before. Wouldn't that be the logic? Why would you commit to Mercedes now and watch Fernando Alonso in an Adrian Newey Aston Martin win 5 Grand Prix next year, which could easily happen? Or somebody else if they don't keep Fernando, Isaac Hadjar, anybody super quick who they put in that Adrian Newey car could do a very good job in that next year. So anyway, I'm a bit confused as to why everybody thinks that. And I'm also a bit confused why everybody thinks Christian would want immediately to go to another team. Juan Marin says, about Horner, why now? Well, yeah, we've been talking about that one, because if it's immediate effect, it's normally that phrase is used when somebody's done something very bad and they're either about to be arrested or about to do something. And it's something that's taken place in the last 24 hours. Because he was working for Red Bull at Silverstone, there's no doubt about that, and he's not anymore. So something's happened. And it could be Max. Or it could be, the court case is not going to go in a good direction and they don't want to have to go through that. Could be that as well. And they've got that intel. You're right. A lot of people saying, Max and Horner, it was one or the other. I think it's more driven by Joss, probably that, isn't it? I don't know. So here's another one. Muzzy T says, Horner's going to go to Aston Martin. Oh, Max. Oh, well, all these people. Horner's just a very good team manager, team principal. That's all he is. He's not going to create magic if he doesn't have good people around him any more than anybody else is. If you want a good guy to go in and kick some butt, I would say you get Jonathan Wheatley. Too late now because he's gone to Sauber, but Christian should never have let that guy go. Right. What are we doing here? 35. Why are you telling us then? There's a lot of discussion going on between you, all chatting away amongst yourselves. Okay, Mark Sears says, Oscar's still improving race by race, whereas Lando's flatlining, I think. I think a lot of people would disagree with that. Wouldn't they say, Oscar's making a few mistakes. What the hell's he doing when leading the Grand Prix and making an error behind the safety car which could possibly get him a penalty, whereas Lando's starting to not worry so much about what's happening immediately in front of him, got a better view of the race as a whole, and he's starting to get some good race results under his belt again. What camp do I fall into for that? I think Lando is like any person. I think he's got momentum, and he's got the feel now that the team can do it with him and win the championship, and he's trying to sort of forget about the whole Oscar thing because he knows that's going to be a nightmare for the rest of the year. But he's got reasonable momentum now, whereas Oscar's thinking, I want to win every race. If it doesn't happen and I'm second or third, it's not the end of the world. I've just got to keep the points going, and I want to win every race. And if I take my eye off the ball in that respect, it's very difficult to start finishing second. I'll just try and win every race. And when he was at Silverstone, he thought, right, well, that's done. I'm winning this race. And then all of a sudden, it was a 10-second penalty, and he didn't win the race. So that's changed things from his point of view. And I don't think he's thinking McLaren should have backed me up there because that penalty was wrong, and they should have realised that, and they should have given me an opportunity of racing Lando to the finish. I don't think he's thinking that. I genuinely think by Monday morning he thought, nah, there's no way McLaren were going to start swapping positions, because apart from anything else, we both would have been driving flat out then, and who knows what would have happened. So he's probably forgotten all that now, and he's just thinking Blanchiment, Pouin, Spa. And that's where he's so good. He's very good. He's very simple, very logical in his approach, and he'll be able to switch off. He doesn't do a lot of interviews, doesn't do a lot of social media, and that's a good thing. Lando probably now will continue all the social media. You see, the whole green grandstand and all the fluorescent green all works, and the baseball cap round the wrong way. The whole thing works. I'm gonna double the social media now. More and more Lando fans. The more Lando fans, the better it'll be. I don't agree with that. Only because he's got to. I think if he had Daniel Ricciardo in the other car, they'd be fine. But I think if he's got Oscar Piastri in the other car with the attitude Oscar's got, I still think Lando needs to just chisel everything away and just focus 100% on being Jimmy Connors. For those that don't remember, Jimmy Connors was a great tennis player, won Wimbledon a few times and the US Open and a few other tournaments. And his philosophy was, I don't even want to stay in the same hotel as the guys I've got to play against. I don't want to see their faces. And I still say that's the right philosophy for Lando Norris this year. David Johnson, I think he's replying to somebody saying, is Formula One going to die? He says, oh no, he's saying, because that is what I will do. Stop watching Formula One. I never said I would be missed or Formula One would come to an end. No wonder. And it won't. Duh. Oh well. I think he's saying that to me because I said Formula One isn't going to die, but I think he's saying he's not interested in Formula One next year, probably. So another one. Rich Noons says, how will the FIA police information being transferred from Laurent Mekies as he switches teams, given the V-carb is performing better? Oh, another of these rules, regulations. But it's the same team, isn't it? Where does that work when it's all owned by the same people? And isn't there a Red Bull Technology Centre that he can sort of mishmash all that stuff through anyway? I wouldn't worry too much about that. If it was a totally different team, I think it'd be it'd be a different thing, wouldn't it? Omar says, Peter, on both safety car restarts, Oscar applied nearly identical brake pressures. Why was the penalty for the second and not the first, or maybe even a warning for the first? Well, yeah, exactly, as I've been saying earlier. And Oscar made that point. And I make the point also that George Russell didn't exactly... I know it was much less brake pedal pressure, but don't forget it was the dry, and they didn't need to get the brakes up to temperature as much as you did at Silverstone in the wet. So... why was there no warning even for George Russell? What there was a protest from Red Bull, and they went through it, and every one of the points made by Red Bull that George braked unnecessarily hard, forcing Max to move to the right, it was unsporting-like, all of that was thrown out immediately. So if that happens, somebody appeals to thrown out, it's a bit of a sort of carte blanche to thinking, well, okay, if I'm leading a Grand Prix, I think I'll do the same. I can't blame anyone for doing that. He braked obviously massively hard, 60 psi, 59.8, but that is how cold the brakes were. And if you think about it, they say it was dangerous. I'm sure it was dangerous in the sense that you can have a crash at 50 kilometers an hour as you can at 250, but it was dangerous. But with the subheading that everybody's brakes were cold, and everybody probably wanted to stand on them that hard as well. So Ben Ubaid Sadler says, I'm with Peter. No conspiracy or FI bias, Brits. There is a much more simpler explanation. The rules are poor and the outcome are the consequences of these poor rules. Absolutely. And to reiterate, I don't think it's a good thing that the FIA have recently said, well, everybody's talking about these penalties. We're now going to be the greatest FIA presidency ever, and we're going to make everything visible. So therefore, no more complaints. Everybody knows what the penalties are. And that is just washing your hands of it completely, because it's saying, well, it's nothing to do with us. These are the rules, blah, blah, blah. And that's exactly what we saw with Oscar. You know, there was it was an application of a rule with a draconian penalty, a stop-go 10-second, as it turned out, against an infringement that had a number of variables in it, which could have been argued afterwards the same way Mercedes argued against Red Bull when Red Bull protested in Canada. But because there was a pit stop, he had to serve that penalty, and all that went out the window. And that's where it's wrong. It's the penalties are far too pinpointed to a very large bracket of infringements. That's the problem. And that implies that the whole system is wrong anyway. There are far too many things they're trying to cover. And there are so many every time they try to be precise about a particular infringement, it opens the door to yet another grey area. If you use the word dangerous or excessive or any of these powerful words, they are open to interpretation and degrees of interpretation based on local conditions. And that's the problem. That's why it's a rocky road to go down that one. And I think they should they should use the VSC more for a start. And I think if it's reds, they should have a VSC blanket speed to avoid the Berman type thing. And if you do what Antonelli did on cold brakes at turn 2, which is different from just going inside somebody in the braking area and trying to get a pass and having them off. It's very different when you do it from quite far back and you lock the brakes because you've got cold brakes and you haven't thought it through. That should be penalised much more than what Oliver Berman did, because it's a race situation. You've got the whole field in front of you in the case of Antonelli, and that's wrong. And equally, anything that involves an incident on the straight when they're almost flat out, moving somebody onto the grass. Who was it that moved Piastri onto the grass in Austria? One of the Williams, I think. That was a horrendous thing. Anything on the straight is as bad as it can get, because there's very little runoff area on a straight by definition, and the accidents can be horrendous on the straight, and the high speeds involved. And I don't think the penalties take that into account either. Well, they obviously don't. There's nothing worse than forcing a driver off the road on the straight. No excuse for it. It's the worst crime you can commit as a racing driver. Well, brake testing is worse on the straight, obviously, but forcing them off is the next worst thing. Right. Blade Bowman says, Peter, what about having fully built third cars for a backup driver's rookie 11-car sprint race on Saturday? Thank you. Yeah. Well, that would be good, wouldn't it? So that's a sort of watered-down version of what I always wanted to do, which is to have a second-tier world championship anyway of last year's Formula One cars, or older, not the current cars anyway. It can be 3 years old if you want, but certainly not the current Formula One cars, driven by the rookie drivers and other drivers all in the colours of the Formula One teams. And it's got its own world championship in all the countries that want to be on the Formula One World Championship and aren't yet, like Colombia, a very good example. I know there's a massive interest to have a race there, but how are they going to get it financed? Well, if they could stage a B Division Formula One race there and get a circuit built around that and everything else and prove that they can do it, then the next step is to have a World Championship Grand Prix. And then you could do one in South Africa, in India, and more in China. All the big economies of the world where we need to have them. And this could be a second-tier World Championship owned by Liberty with its own TV rights, with its own sponsorship and everything else. It'd be a great thing, rather than all these third drivers sitting around doing nothing with headsets on, driving occasionally on very rarely do we have somebody doing what Alexander Dunn did for McLaren in Austria. They usually don't get the chance, do they? I mean, I don't think Dino Bogdanovic got a great chance at Ferrari, for example. David Johnson says Max took both hands off his steering wheel just before the incident and top speed 138 to 7 miles an hour more than Oscar. Yeah. No, it wasn't good, but then again, it's because there's no specific rule. I mean, everyone's knocking Oscar about this, but well, I think you are, but not knocking it, but you're pointing out how big the speed thing was. But it doesn't say when you're behind the safety car and the lights go off, the maximum speed is X and the maximum brake pedal pressure you can apply is Y. And it doesn't say that because race to race, it's always going to be different depending on what the track surface is, what tyres you're on, what the brake temperatures are like. So they can't do that. That's one of the reasons I think this whole thing is ludicrous anyway, because all these so-called infringements aren't actually, you can't justify them with very precise 10-second penalties. So, hopefully I've made that point. But I think, the problem is that there's so much grey area that you can't expect drivers like Oscar to know exactly how much brake pedal pressure to use when they see George doing what he did in Canada. I know it was less brake pedal pressure, but nonetheless he was still the leader, still behind the safety car, and he still suddenly braked to the point where Max went to the right. Whether, okay, it was 30 psi, not 60. But the precedent was kind of set then. That's the point. And that was a protest. So everybody got to read all the results, and it was, oh no, George was fine. Not even a warning. So what's Oscar going to think going into the British Grand Prix in that situation when he's got unbelievably cold brakes and he wants to get the things heated up as quickly as possible? Yeah, I totally get it from Max's point of view, and I totally get it from the point of view of the amount of brake pedal pressure, and it was a penalisable offence. But then let's have some continuity, please, from race to race, so over the season, so we know what's going on. Susie Perry says, is this actually the last year of real Formula One? Are we in the end of times for motorsport as a whole? The petrol engine is over. I think it's so sad. Well, I hope not. Let's not be too depressing about all this. I did say Toyota are doing a nice job with their hydrogen engine development in the rally car, and that is still, and I think the FIA are looking at it, but they're going so far down the electrification road, it is a bit depressing, I agree, in terms of noise and drama and everything we expect from Formula One. But for all that, blame Bernie and John Todd for me, because it was very clear before Formula E was created that Formula One should, if they wanted to get a whole lot of new money and manufacturers into Formula One around the back of the whole hybrid revolution, that the way to do that was to start nurturing electric car technology in the form of a Formula E car and having it as part of the Formula One global package in the support race program, with some of the Formula One drivers on a regular basis taking part in that race, and the teams transferring some of their technology to those electric team cars. And that's what should all have been owned by Formula One, and that would have left Formula One to be normally aspirated engines burning lots of fuel and making lots of noise, and they justifying their existence in the future by having this B division championship or support race championship like Academy. But they didn't do it because Bernie and Todd fell out, and Todd, in his response, went off and set up Formula E with commercial rights with AGAG, basically to take that option away from Formula One. And that's why we are where we are at today. It's the same thing with tyres. If we hadn't driven Michelin out of the sport, accusing them of cheating, we'd probably still have Michelin tyres in Formula One. Everything goes back to a certain point in time. Patrick Castile, draconian penalties, though passport matters. It determines if you get a penalty and how draconian it will be. Well, I just hope you're not right. That's all I can say. George didn't get one in Canada. Oscar got one in England. So I don't know. I don't think. Was it Vitantonio Luzzi was the driver steward, I think, at Silverstone, Italian. He'd be a bit of an Oscar fan, I would have thought, knowing Vit. I don't know. So David Johnson, yeah, that's a good point, but an obvious point. Oscar wasn't even racing Max; he was just preparing to gap the safety car. Muzit says, Peter, what do you think about Christian going to Aston Martin? Well, I don't see... Well, I mean, he knows Adrian. Didn't Adrian leave because of the Christian thing, though? I thought that was what everybody was saying at the time. Adrian's leaving because he didn't like the way the whole Christian scandal was going on. And so why would Adrian now approve of Christian going to Aston Martin? That doesn't make any sense to me, that one, really. Unless everybody got it wrong and Adrian desperately wanted to stay at Red Bull but left because he got paid so much money by Stroll, which is always a possibility, of course. And Horner will be the same. I don't know. So saying Cameron's live regarding Horner. Yeah, I'm sure he is. So switch over to Cameron, please, if you... He'll give very good insight as well. He's very good, switched on. David Johnson says, I think he's correct here. Newey is the magician, not Horner. Well, he's absolutely right there. Doug reckons he's going to go to Ferrari. Very few people are saying he's going to relax at home and walk the dog, isn't it? That's what I do all the time, walk the dog. He's still over there. Dexter, what's going on? Dexter, come on. Come on, Dexter. Come on. Still sleeping. We did a very long walk this morning, actually. It was quite hot too, humid. So Mama Talovich says they should sack him. They should have sacked him last year and promote Wheatley. Yeah, well, you know, I'm sure Jonathan would have stayed at Red Bull had he been promoted, but I think there would have been a way for Christian to have created a position for Jonathan in which Jonathan could grow at Red Bull and to acknowledge. And I think that was, for me, that was one of his biggest mistakes in recent times, was not to let Jonathan grow at Red Bull and to let him go to Sauber. And I've always thought Jonathan Wheatley is one of the best pit lane guys out there. Alan Permain would be another for sure. Horner to Alpine. Briatore likes Horner. Yeah, but he's got Steve Nielsen, and Steve is young and fresh and hungry, youngish and fresh and hungry. Whereas Christian, what would Christian be able to do that Steve Nielsen couldn't do there? Very little, I think. Right. So, Derek L. Peter, thank you for your time. What would happen with Nico in a top car? He's always able to run quite high with much lesser cars. Oh, if Nico Hulkenberg was in a McLaren and had been in a McLaren since last year, I think he would have won several Grand Prix. Not sure he's as quick as Oscar, but he would certainly be giving Lando a hard time on a regular basis. Probably quicker than Daniel Ricciardo, I think. And Daniel's last year at McLaren. No, Nico's really good. And he's right now, you'd have to have no knowledge of Formula One at all if you're a team principal, not thinking that you should never forget about Nico Hulkenberg as a potential driver if the opportunity is there, because he's that good. He's so versatile in so many different conditions on the track, and he's a very good race driver. He's really improved in terms of his consistency throughout the race, and he's very good at starts. He's very good in traffic. He's very good in understanding what he needs from the car in order to be quick, when to push, when to shove, and if he's not quick, making the most of it, going into the race with lots of tyre options and getting on with it. He's just a great racing driver. So what do you think? 413 Tobacco says, I think Max would prefer to have Newey designing his car. Well, yeah, I think everybody would. I think Fernando's desperate to keep that drive because he just wants to know what it's like to drive an Adrian Newey car. Belief Flock, hi, long time viewer here. Hi there. Appreciate your content and experience. Thank you very much. Expertise. Well, thank you. Have you ever seen this coming? Well, I think we all thought when the whole Horner scandal thing began, we all thought it's a bit of a difficult one, this. And so it's a bit like the Max thing, isn't it? You know, I assume Max would resign immediately, Max Mosley, not Max Verstappen, Max Mosley, and when all that stuff happened with the News of the World. But he didn't. He carried on for a couple of years, and so it was with Christian. I assumed he would resign pretty soon after that, but he didn't. And then, but then, you know, he lost Adrian, he lost Jonathan Wheatley, he got rid of Perez. You know, there's three things that should not have happened, really, in my opinion. Rob Marshall, another one. Pete Prod, slightly different because it was a while ago now, and Adrian can't keep everybody there working under him. So Pete Prod he's doing a very good job at McLaren now. But Rob Marshall, really, a bit like Jonathan Wheatley, they should never have let him go, I don't think. So anyway, I'm going to have to peg it in now, guys. I say peg it in. I've told this story before, but in 1971, my sister, we all grew up in Australia. My sister, though, was getting married to an Englishman in England in the back end of 71, in the winter of 71. And we all came over for the wedding. And, of course, we were there for about 3 weeks, I think. And all I wanted to do was go to racetracks and buy motoring news and autosport and smell the pages and dream one day I might be Mike Dudson or Andrew Marriott or whatever, something like that. And anyway, at one point, and I bought that's right, Keith Holland, very good driver, very underrated, winner of a couple of big Formula 5000 races, did the Tasman Series in 70 with a McLaren, amazing. And I volunteered, without my mum's permission, to let him and his manager, Eric Seal, stay at our house. We had a lovely house on the beach, on the harbour in Sydney, which my dad bought for under 5,000 guineas, as they were in 1959, I think. And it went on to be, you know, when he sold it, it was then demolished and flats were built. It was a lovely place to grow up anyway. And Keith and Eric couldn't believe it. And they loved this house, and there they were. And it wasn't that far from Warwick Farm. They drove to the track every day, and I got to know them quite well. Anyway, when I came to England in 71, I rang Keith Holland and said, I need a car, Keith. Can you sell me a car? Or can I use a car? And he said, oh, yeah, I've got this old Vauxhall VX490 you can buy. Yeah, it's 200 quid, mate, for the 3 weeks. Anyway, I bought this Vauxhall VX490, drove down to Goodwood, because I'd never been to Goodwood before, and it was freezing cold, you know, icy. And I just wanted to see Goodwood. It was in the old days, long before it was revamped. And there was anything going on. It was just a test track, and that was it. And I got there. And unbelievably, John Surtees was there testing a Formula One car, driving the car. And so I sort of stood there in the pit lane watching it all and listening. And Bernie Ferry, his mechanic, was there. And everything was amazing. And I kind of knew Surtees a little bit from the Tasman Series. So he looked at me and sort of waved a little bit. That was it. Anyway, he came in at the end of the day and it was almost dark. And I remember him getting out of the car and saying, oh, that's it, boys. And I'm not going to do his accent very well, but anyway, he got out of the car, took off his helmet and said, well, I think a spigot's got on the camshaft, so I think we'll peg it in now and go home. And I always thought, peg it in. That's a great thing. So there we are. We're going to peg it in now. The spigot's gone on the camshaft. And not sure when I'll do the next live stream because, as I say, I'm going on this marathon trip. But I might post some shorts, I think. I don't know if you want to watch out and see what's going on our way up to Estonia and back and all the things we do on the way. Should be some fun there, I think. And hopefully the rally will be brilliant. Can't wait to see Ollie Solberg in a Rally 1 Toyota Yaris. That's going to be, I'm looking forward to that more than I think anything else this year. He's really good, Ollie Solberg, and what a great guy too. And he really deserves that opportunity. So I'm glad he's going to be in that rally and we're going to be there. So looking forward to that. Big thanks to OEM Exclusive, to Jetcraft, to RAC Watches and to TrackNinja for their support of our channel and making this possible. And of course you, to the viewer, big thanks to you. Without your support, these live streams certainly wouldn't be happening, and A and B, the channel wouldn't be going in the direction in which it is. So thank you very much indeed for that. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the shorts fairly soon, and then obviously back again for the Belgian Grand Prix at Spa. Thanks for watching.